So what we're going to do now, Caroline and I are going to speak about our experiences of working together. So I'll talk for about 10 minutes or so from my perspective of both participatory research that I've done, but particularly working with Caroline, and then I'll hand over to her and she'll talk for about 10 minutes or so, and then we'll have some time for questions at the end. So for me, I've been working in the autism research field for nearly 15 years now. I started off working as a volunteer at an autism charity, and that's what initially sparked my interest in autism research. And then I was offered the opportunity to do a PhD on memory in autistic adults. But I don't have a personal autism connection, so I don't identify as autistic. I don't have any family members who have an autism diagnosis, and I don't work professionally with autistic people as a clinician or educator or anything like that. So I'm just a researcher who is doing work in the autism field. But what I do try to be is as good an ally to the autistic community as I can be, and that's what I hope I'm known for by my autistic and non-autistic colleagues and collaborators. And currently I work at CRAE, so the Centre for Research in Autism and Education. And I think that this is a centre that's seen by lots of people as a centre with the kind of right ethos. So a centre that really tries to do our best to do research that is aligned with the priorities of the autistic community and has a really positive impact on their life. But many years ago, before I joined CRAE, I was doing a PhD on memory in autistic adults, or as I then referred to them as adults with high-functioning autism and/or Asperger syndrome, because I didn't know any better. And I thought, my PhD was amazing. It was on autobiographical memory, and basically I got to sit there and listen to autistic people telling me their life stories. And I got to hear firsthand lived experiences from a real range of autistic people. And it was a privilege, and it was a really wonderful introduction to autism research. And one of the things that they spoke to me about a lot during this project was diagnosis, and how this was such a pivotal moment for them. And this led on to a body of research that I did on the autism diagnostic perspectives of adults and parents and professionals. And this was done around 2010, and at this time no one mentioned at all involving the autistic community in my research other than as participants. You know, my advisors and the people I was working with didn't say anything at all, and although I had some autistic people kind of get in touch with some feedback on my work, which was really, really helpful, that was the kind of extent of it. And I don't think this kind of way of participatory working was really advocated very much, at least not from the academic community. But one thing that was being advocated was this idea of impact and taking your research and kind of beyond academia. So I set up this event on autism diagnosis to kind of showcase the research that we've been doing. And there were two key things that happened at this event that were really kind of pivotal. So the first is that one of the people speaking at the event was Liz Pellicano. And she'd just finished this project that I'm sure many of you are familiar with called A Future Made Together. And this work highlighted a couple of really important messages. So firstly, that the work that was being done by researchers wasn't aligned with what autistic people and their families wanted to see being researched. And secondly, one of the reasons for this was because actually there wasn't very much involvement from the autistic community in the research. And Liz's talk really resonated with me because although she emphasised how actually hardly any academics were doing this, I realised I was part of this problem and I needed to kind of change my way of working. And the other key thing that happened just before this event was that I got a complaint come through from an autistic person about this event I was organising. And this autistic person was Caroline. And she was very right to complain about the event because I only had one autistic speaker. And I think, you know, having an autistic person complain about something you're doing, you're trying to do the right thing. And, you know, people are kind of judging you in the academic community as such. You know, you want to do everything right. You do dread it. But actually, I was really pleased Caroline got in touch. Because actually, you know, it meant a lot that my event was of interest to her. And if she hadn't have got in touch, I wouldn't have known I was doing anything wrong. So I responded to her, thanking her for contacting me, trying to give her a little bit more context as to why I did things the way I did. But I completely hold my hands up. And if I was doing the event again, what I've done today, we do have lots of autistic voices, and I think that's really important. But at the event, Caroline came up and spoke to me, and she told me about this group she wanted to set up, an autistic-led group to support autistic people who have identified that they're autistic or have recently got an autism diagnosis. And she wanted an evaluation of it to make sure that when she set it up, it was working. And I thought it sounded great. It sounded like a really good opportunity to help contribute to a project that was going to make a big difference to autistic people. And then Caroline did get funding for the programme, and we put together an evaluation together. And what we produced, the kind of evaluation that we put together, I think looks nothing like what I would have put together if I was doing this myself. So I probably would have had lots of standardised questionnaires, it would have taken a very long time. And actually we got this amazing rich data from our participants. Almost everyone wanted to take part, and I think that's a testament to some of the changes that Caroline insisted upon to make the research process more comfortable for not only me but also the participants. So she invited me along to one of the group meetings where everyone got to have a chat with me, about not just the research but my motivations for why I'm here and why I want to do this. And we had pizza and chatted, and it was brilliant. And I think, there was a real benefit to this co-production. From my perspective, I was able to come in to make sure things were conducted to a very high ethical standard through the frameworks that we have in academia. And Caroline, from her professional and personal experience, was able to put things in place to make the research a better experience for the autistic people taking part in her group. And I think that's critical, and something that's always resonated with me. I remember hearing KB from the Autism Rights Group Highland talk about her experiences of research and how negative they were, and how it really puts her off of taking part in research. And that's something we really, really need to avoid, and I think it's having that autistic involvement that will really help with that. But I do think, as positive as our experience was, there were some issues. And I think one of the reasons for this is that it was an unfunded project, as Hannah highlighted earlier. This is a major, major barrier. So I was working as a postdoctoral researcher, so I was being paid to do research for other people, which meant that I was doing Caroline's project, evenings and weekends, whenever I could fit it in. So on top of a kind of demanding workload and having a small family, trying to fit this in was hard. And just having some funding to have some help with transcription, or someone to help write up or design the reports that we were preparing could have been really, really helpful. But overall, I think for me, the pros of the project really outweigh the cons. I think that what we've produced is going to be very important and very impactful. And I think, I just want to thank Caroline really for putting her trust in me and giving me this opportunity. So in terms of I don't kind of feel like I'm an expert. I've done a few participatory projects and some quite high profile ones, but I don't think I'm an expert. But I think from my experience, the things that I might suggest was, firstly, I think every little step counts. If I hadn't have put together my poorly organised event that Caroline kind of complained about, and I hadn't taken the time to kind of engage with her, I don't think it would have led on to this collaboration. So I think even little steps really help. I think it's hard to do things alone, and I think one of the great things about having a network of early career researchers is about working together and maybe sharing some of the workload. And I think it's also really important to kind of own up if we make mistakes, because we will do. And I think that's how we're going to start working more collaboratively, and addressing things that are going wrong, and working together with autistic advocates like Caroline to have a better kind of landscape of autism research in the future. And on that note, I'm going to hand you over to Caroline, who's going to talk from her perspective about what she thinks about our experiences of working together. So thank you.
So I'm Caroline. I'm basically an an autistic adult who's come into an interest in research sideways, because I see it as something which affects the culture that we live in. So I will sort of start at the beginning, how I met with Laura and the work that we did together. Can people hear me? Yeah, okay, that's great. So I discovered that I was autistic about 10 years ago, and I discovered it in a way that is actually quite usual for autistic adults, which is just by reading a random article in the newspaper. So I'd actually been through a lot of psychotherapy. I trained as an art psychotherapist, and autism didn't figure in my training. Nobody who I'd seen to help me with depression had picked up that I am autistic. I was working as a consumer advisor in the mental health field. So I realized that there was just like a massive gap of knowledge about autism, and I found it really useful as a framework to understand myself. And at that time, there was much less information out there, and there was much less, especially information written by and for autistic people. So I was able to hoover up everything that was there. So I sort of read everything. And I also assumed that organisations calling themselves, I was in New Zealand at the time, the Autism New Zealand, were actually organisations that would be helpful for me, and organisations like the NAS. I also assumed that research into autism would be something that was useful to me. And I sort of gradually found out that this was not necessarily the case. So I participated in, like I would volunteer, if people were asking for autistic people to volunteer to participate in research, I would volunteer to participate in research. But I just found it immensely irritating. So there would be these questionnaires, and they would often have these ridiculous false dichotomies, like, you know, do you prefer to go to a party or go to a library? Well, it depends, actually, what mood I'm in. So at which point, you can't keep going. You know, it's like you've got to put this or that, and you know that the result is going to be crap because the question's crap, and so you don't. And another sort of big bit of research, which actually really upset me in terms of the resource that had been put into it, was, well, they don't tell you what it's about, so I can't remember what they told me it was about, but they attached loads of little plastic sucker things to my head so that they could see what my brain was doing, and got me to engage with a computer. And I was supposed to either, if I won, then I'd get 20p each time I won, but I could lie, so I could say that I had a match when I didn't have a match. But it was so boring, like the thing you had to do came up so slowly and you couldn't regulate the time which you were going to be responding to this computer, that I had to devise my own game that had nothing to do with winning 20p, because even though I wasn't very wealthy, 20p was not really a major incentive to me. So I sort of devised my own reason for which button I pressed. And it turned out, after spending quite a lot of time doing this, that they took all the stuff off me, and that this research was about autistic people's brain response to telling lies. Because I might have been lying to get this 20p. But because I was actually off beam, I wasn't doing what I was supposed to be doing, it nullified the whole research. But anyway, the whole research was rubbish, because lying to a computer is completely different to lying to a human being. And when I complained, about this and about the fact that it took, there were several, I think there were 3 interviews involved, 3 sessions involved in this. And one of the sessions was talking, they asked me questions. And I was told it was maximum 2 hours, and I scheduled in 2 hours. And at the end of 2 hours, I wanted to go, but it wasn't finished. And when I sort of complained, like you told me it was 2 hours, they said, oh, but you were too chatty. And so I really felt this is really not terribly helpful. These people are blaming the victim, if you like, for their research not being properly structured, and what they're researching isn't going to show whatever they say it's going to show, and is actually going to be damaging. So it's going to come out with results that maybe get some credibility more widely that I just cannot believe are relevant. So gradually I began to see, and I also engaged with the, well, I won't name them, but you might know of major autistic charities in this country, and found that, in fact, autism started to feel like it was a business rather than actually these charities were no longer about actual autistic people. They were about maintaining themselves. Well, okay, so when I saw, a friend told me about a conference that was diagnosing autism, making voices heard, which was Laura's conference, and it said, making voices heard, and I'm like, I've got a voice, and I'd been touting round this, my project for what I called, at that time, I now call it, as Laura did, a post-identification program, but then I called it a post-diagnostic program, which was essentially a program for people who'd been, had got an autism diagnosis, not to just be left with it, which is what happened to a lot of people. So you get this diagnosis, and often you're really pleased because it explains things, but people then tend to sort of plummet down a bit when they realise nothing much has changed and there's no more support. So I had this, worked out what I thought would be a good program, a 10-week program, and I would take it round to people who I thought could fund it, and they'd say, oh yeah, that's a great idea. I suggest you see so-and-so or so-and-so. And so it went on. You know, I was unable to get any funding. But I felt like I had spoken to quite a lot of people. And when I saw this, making voices heard, I then phoned up various other autistic people who didn't know about this conference either. So then I shot off an email to Laura saying, this is outrageous. You're not making voices heard. And I didn't really expect to hear any more because, as I say, the response to my previous complaints, which, you know, I do tend to fire off emails, hadn't always been very positive. But Laura came back with really a lovely reply, like not at all defensive. She's like, oh yes, I can see your point. This is why I've done it this way. Maybe I would do it differently in future. And it would be nice to speak to you. So at the actual conference, which I went to, which I also was very impressed by, because the general attitude was so positive. It really wasn't this talking about autistic people as like these poor things. It was like, okay, in the work I've been doing, I've noticed there's this massive gap around diagnosis. So that's why I called this together. That was the sort of impression I got. So to be honest, I talked to Laura not because I particularly wanted an evaluation done. It was purely because I was under the misapprehension that she could get money to research this thing. So that would be a way of funding. So I said, here's this thing I'd like to do. Maybe you could have it as a research project and that would fund it happening. And actually she did very generously try and help me get funding for that. So together we sort of conversed a bit about it, and then eventually my method of getting funding finally did come through, and Laura agreed to do the research, which was brilliant and felt really useful because it just helped show that this project was useful, how it was useful, how it could be made more useful. So that was very, very positive to me. But also, the other thing that I'd really like to say about this collaboration, I mean, there's a few things. One is, I think that we personally have got a similar outlook, and that makes it work. And I don't think, you know, you can just pick any random autistic person and random researcher and assume that it's going to work. And I also accept that there aren't official structures. So there is an autistic community, but it doesn't have structures where you can say that this person is speaking for autistic people. So you're just getting an individual voice of somebody generally who is autistic. But the other thing was that essentially Laura was doing the research to benefit an autistic originated project. So it was the absolute other way round to what was usually done in research that I'd experienced. So the research I'd experienced is this researcher's got this idea and they're going to use you, me, as a guinea pig to hopefully prove their idea. And they're going to just take you out of the research if you don't behave in the way that they expect you to. Whereas how I would love to see autism research working is that which is happening a lot more now, and that's why I'm so delighted about this conference, is that you've got the agenda of the autistic community and that researchers help develop things that can meet that agenda and help autistic people live more fulfilled lives, basically, that we're able to contribute. So that's, and I just feel that's, we need allies, and allies like Laura are like gold dust, so it's brilliant. And it's also great that there are a lot of people in the field like Damien over there who are themselves autistic researchers who are trying to build together participatory research. But what I see as an actual problem, because I was fortunate to get a Churchill scholarship to travel overseas to look at autistic provision for autistic people and also co-produced research, is that a lot of people are doing what they call participatory or co-produced research that are actually just ticking boxes. So they're just getting random autistic people, thank you, they're getting random autistic people in there, and then they can say it's co-produced, but actually it's totally to their agenda. And if the autistic person makes any comment that doesn't fit their agenda, they're out the window, or just get another autistic person because all you're doing is ticking a box. So that isn't participatory research as far as I'm concerned, and I've seen it. I think that is basically what I've got to say. So I think, so we can answer any questions.
Yeah, we have some time for questions. Anyone has any questions that they want to put?
I know this event is focused at early career researchers, but how do you change the tide of researchers who are quite settled into their methods that don't at all include autistic people? Like, I know it's kind of very off topic, but it seems like if that's where a lot of the funding is going, because it's not really going to PGRs and ECRs, then I think that's also where the change needs to be made.
Well, I'll say a bit. I mean, that. Well, to me, what we're talking about essentially is a cultural change in relation to autism, and this is a bit of it. So what I always think of is, like, in my lifetime, there's been a massive change in relation to homosexuality, which was illegal, and now it's illegal to discriminate on the basis of sexuality. Now, that might seem like an irrelevant point, but the point is that as the general culture changes towards more inclusion, I would say gradually that will change, but that doesn't help you at the sort of micro level where you're at now, but that's how I'd see it sitting. So.
Yeah, and I think it's really important that we have our kind of ultimate goals in mind. And I think we need little things to happen to kind of change that. And I think hopefully when we hear Abby and James talk later on, it will be about how actually at the levels where researchers are incentivised, such as research funding, making sure that we try to include that ethos much more is really, really critical. And I would hope, I mean, other people in the room would probably be better placed to answer this than me, and I hope that's some of the things we can have a discussion about. But I think there needs to be changes in lots of different ways.
Hi both. I think there's been a historical problem too, because autistic people, having had so much time wasted participating as participants in research, subjected to research rather than participating in. I've been one of those people who has gone on and on social media about, we're just the guinea pigs for these people to climb a career ladder, blah, 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 blah. So the ethos, the culture needs to be changed both from the researcher point of view and from the autistic point of view. I mean, I'm now participating in research and it makes such a difference, but I'm still seeing researchers who are just not interested in them over there, except for what we can do for their careers, and I'm quite cynical about that. So We really need the culture to be changed by pushing the participation agenda so that we're more willing to participate, and that researchers do not see us like the sort of either passive experiment or opposition even, because if we have a voice and they don't want to hear it, we're an opposition, as Caroline was saying. Sorry, so therefore, is there a way, sorry, I forgot the question. Is there a way that you can think of overcoming this?
I would say it's important to make your views heard, you know, because I think lots of early career researchers, I'm speaking from my own experience, do things that they think are beneficial and don't realise, as I said with my experience with Caroline, I didn't know what I was doing wrong, and it was by being called out about it that you can change. So I think it's really important to say what you think about research and be really open. And I think researchers need to listen, and I don't think that's what we've been doing enough of. And I appreciate for early career researchers, sometimes, you know, it's not your project, you're doing someone else's work. But I would hope, I mean, there's some literature there, you know, the autistic community is becoming more vocal. I'm really positive that things may change.
Yeah, I mean, I think things are changing. Sorry, what was the question?
And what we can do.
What we can do. I actually think an important thing is that researchers put themselves in the picture so that you're aware of your own neurology and you think about it. You don't just assume that you're neurotypical and they're autistic. I've come across so many people working in the autism field who I regard as autistic, and they will actually tell you, you know, I'm neurotypical. And that causes cognitive dissonance for the actual subjects. You know, so if somebody's saying to me, I'm neurotypical, and I'm researching autism, I sort of want to know why, which is how come we brought Laura along to one of the meetings of this group so that people could talk to her and feel confident that she was not sort of exploitative, didn't have a view that these were some people over here who were really strange. And I think that, I know that doesn't sit well often with researchers who like to think themselves outside of the picture, but you're not outside of the picture, because if you're doing research with people, that's a human being, and you need to sort of put yourself in the picture a bit.
I found that experience really valuable as well, coming along and having people question me about things like that. And I think it gives you as a researcher a better understanding of what their anxieties about the research are, so that you can try to overcome those in future. I would hope, anyway.
I'm just going to take one final question.
Okay.
That's all right.
I'd just like to support what was said in the first question, which is that a lot of supervisors, for example, of master's dissertations and PhD theses, are actually in schools of education and schools of psychology, and are either not aware of or not supportive of collaborative and participative research, or actively dismissive of it. I mean, I would just like to sort of add that I feel that there's a sort of marketing thing that could be done towards faculty members who are likely to be supervising. I think that's really important. And then I do have a question, which is that I've just been setting up, I'm researching autistic experience of sexuality, and I've been setting up an advisory group, and I've had an amazing response to that, mainly from women. I'm wondering if you have any thoughts about why, okay, it's very anecdotal, but why there might be a lot of autistic women who are coming forward to participate in collaborative research.
Well, I mean, I just think it's because women are more collaborative. I mean, what can I say? It's not, well, it isn't. It's not confined to autism. You know, and a lot of the way in which autism has been defined has been male, and the idea now that, oh, we didn't diagnose women because they were masking is completely ridiculous, because these people are supposed to be the experts. Well, they're obviously not the experts if they can't recognise autistic women. And so all I'm saying in answer to that is I would say that's probably would be no different to the general demographic if you were doing something on sexuality, or is that what you said you were doing? Sexuality amongst the general population, you'd probably get more responses from women as well. So that's just a thing, would be my guess. But obviously I'm not qualified to say. I think James was going to say something there, were you?
Yeah, so James was just saying that he confirms women are more likely to participate in autism research endeavours. So,
I think you said genuine research.
all medical, all research. Thank you. On that note, I think we're ready to move on to the next speaker. So I just want to say a huge thank you to Caroline.
And Laura.